You see, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, dude, Jeremy, you said Red Dead Redemption review. You promised that. I heard you say it, and I did. But my RPG fan friends out there will agree, and they'll know what I'm talking about when I say I started playing an RPG, and I went through the entire RPG, and I beat it because it was awesome. And now I gotta talk about this RPG, so let's talk about it because it's an RPG worth talking about. Final Fantasy VI, or Final Fantasy III as it was called on the Super NES in America, and the Wii Virtual Console still, I believe. But for the sake of this review, I'm gonna call it Final Fantasy VI because that's what it is. Alright, so Final Fantasy VI is an RPG from what I call the golden age of Squaresoft. They really put their time in their RPGs back then. You can tell just the entire crew had the mindset, they're like, this is our Deer Hunter, our Eiffel Tower, and it shows in games like this. Alright, so at least in my circle of friends and people I know and talk to, and I'm pretty sure people online, there are a couple of debates going on in the RPG communities, which is what's better, Final Fantasy VI or Final Fantasy VII, or what's better, Final Fantasy VI or Chrono Trigger. Either way, Final Fantasy VI is in the middle of all this, so that's the one we're going to talk about. So Final Fantasy VI is a sprite-based RPG from the Super Nintendo era. Yeah, none of these 3D graphics, no sprites, you know, old school. And as much as it sounds like that compromises the experience, it does not compromise the experience at all. 1,000 years ago, magic was really abundant, it was everywhere, and it led to the War of the Magi, which completely leveled the entire planet. The world was a wasteland, and then magic just simply vanished. Then steam and coal and industrial shit built the world back up. That's what technology's running on now, because magic's gone, or so everyone thinks. But there is a bit of it left, and a couple of maniacs are gonna try to get that magic and harness it, but they run the risk of wiping out the world again, so the good guys have to stop them. Just how the game starts out, the game is just completely cinematic, and you're like, okay, I'm in for something a little more than just some sprite-based RPG. I'm gonna make it brief, I'm not gonna go into detail about this, but it starts out on this hill, there's this one chick, she's a magic chick, and she's being controlled by the Empire with this crown. They have Magitech armor, and they're looking at this town, they're like, yeah, we gotta go get this Esper, which are, you know, magic things. And so they're like, let's go wipe out this town and get this Esper. And this chick is a good person, but she's being controlled, so they all walk down, and one of the greatest themes ever made in video game history plays as the camera's behind them, and they're walking towards this town, and it was Super Nintendo graphics back then, but it was like advanced Super Nintendo graphics. This town's just coming closer while this theme is playing and the beginning credits start, and you're like, that's what movies do. But it happened in 1994 on a Super Nintendo game. And then from there, you meet a plethora of some of the most relatable characters in RPG history, and you go about your business. You know, trying to save the world and whatnot. Hi, welcome to my channel where we talk about what I think is cool. Now, in an RPG, gameplay is really important. You're gonna be fighting, leveling, and grinding through the battles, so let's at least make that enjoyable and balanced. Final Fantasy VI does it really well. You can teach every character all the magic, but the characters do have specific abilities specific to them, giving them their own flavor, and I love that. You'd be surprised at how many RPGs just go, alright, yeah, teach everyone everything, and just make them the same person, really. But Final Fantasy VI was like, nah, you can teach everyone the spells, but they have their own abilities also. But who are we kidding? You teach everyone Ultima, and you break the game, and you win. That's just what will happen. Another element in RPGs that's important are the characters. Like I said, these characters in Final Fantasy VI, some of the most relatable ever made. I mean, they're little sprites. You shouldn't relate to them. I mean, you relate to Mass Effect 2 characters, yeah. But sprites? Really? Yeah, really. Because every character has relevance. You have these side quests that you can do for the characters, and it just, you learn a little more about them. There's a character named Shadow. He's a ninja. He really hops into your party when he feels like it. He's one of those mercenary types. He'll fight with you until he feels like he doesn't have to anymore, and then he just leaves. You might see him again, you might not. At a point in the game, he does permanently join your party if you have patience and wait for him. But you would think that'd be the character with the lightest story. You're like, all right, mercenary character, who's gonna care? The answer, yeah, you. Because the story they give him is really good. Don't get me wrong, the crew in 7, Cloud, Tifa, Aerith, I love them all. But the characters in Final Fantasy VI, I got more attached to, and I was thinking about it, I was like, why is that? Because Final Fantasy VI has, again, what a lot of games these days don't have, which makes me sound really old. These games these days. I don't mean to be like that, but I'm just saying the characters in Final Fantasy VI had their own themes. Not only is the theme to Final Fantasy VI one of the best themes ever made, but the character themes are fantastic. I mean, let's be honest about this. We can't talk about Final Fantasy VI without talking about its soundtrack and its soundtrack's composer, Nobuo Uematsu. The guy is a genius, complete musical genius. For comparison's sake, imagine paint to a painter is like an orchestra for a composer. In which case, using 16-bit Super Nintendo MIDI technology to create music would be like a painter painting with Crayola crayons. What did Nobuo Uematsu do with that technology? He created the Sistine Chapel with Crayola crayons, metaphorically speaking. I consider the Final Fantasy VI soundtrack to be his masterpiece in more ways than one. I could just listen to it all day long. You're listening to it, you're like, oh yeah, there's Shadow again. There's Cyan, there's Terra, and you're just right back there emotionally with the characters that you've bonded with, which are sprites from a Super Nintendo game. I guess that's the most impressive thing about Final Fantasy VI. When characters are 3D rendered, you expect that they're gonna feel more human. That's not always the case. These sprites feel more human than most things I've seen in games today. Like, there's this one scene with an opera. It's one of the classic moments in this game where this one chick, she was raised to be a warrior in this empire, and now she's working with you, but she's ultimately like, I've been bred for war. I know nothing else. And this one dude, one of your other guys, his name is Locke, he has kind of a crush on her, and they have their own little thing going on, so this has romantic elements in it too. And she does this opera, and it's one of these humanizing moments where she's like, I am more than just a dog of war. It's like if Solid Snake learned that he could live for more than war, that's this moment in this game. Not knocking Solid Snake, but I'm just saying that it was a really good humanizing moment in an RPG, and it happened in 16-bit glory. And also what's important in any RPG, as well as any game, is a great villain. Final Fantasy VI has a great villain. That's another battle going on within the RPG community. Which villain is better? Final Fantasy VI's Kefka or Final Fantasy VII's Sephiroth? Both are badasses, but they're hard to compare. Sephiroth is like Darth Vader. He's really menacing and stoic, and when he's in the room, shit is business. And if Sephiroth is like Darth Vader, I would say Kefka is like the Joker. Yeah, Kefka's like the Joker if the Joker actually had the Force like Darth Vader, had magic, and became a demigod. And this is spoilerish here, but it's worth touching on. He actually is the villain that wins. That's another reason I love this game so much. Villains never win. Sephiroth in Final Fantasy VII tried to bring a meteor down on the Earth, but they fought and they won. So many movies, so many games out there are like, oh, we need to stop the world from ending. Kefka's like, yeah, 2/3 of the way through Final Fantasy VI, I win. The world gets burned to the ground, your crew is scattered. It picks up a year later and you have to gather everybody together to beat Kefka, but the world's still burned. It's over. All you can do is take him out and hope that you rebuild. I love that shit. Having the balls to tell a story where the villain actually does win and you show that the world doesn't actually stop at that point. Oh yeah, it's completely destroyed, but it's not over. There are still people alive. If you have that thought in your head like, they don't make a game like that, I wish they would. They did. It's Final Fantasy VI or 3 for the Super Nintendo. Play it. Square has done a crusade or two about re-releasing their old Final Fantasy games with souped up 3D graphics. At first I was like, oh, that'd be cool to see with 6. Especially on like PS3 graphics, all in cinematic glory. That still would be cool, but ultimately, I don't know if I want them to really dick with it that much. It's great as it is. Just HD up the sprites like they did with Final Fantasy IV on the PSP, re-release it that way. I would buy that and play the shit out of it. Now, if you do take my advice and go out to get this game to play it, get the Game Boy Advance version or the Wii Virtual Console version. Those are really close to the Super Nintendo versions. Not really suggesting the PlayStation Network version that you can download for like $5 or $10 because it's the PS1 version that they released on the PlayStation 1, but I didn't like the emulator. Some of the sounds were different. Instead of slashes, they were thuds. The battles infuriated me in the Super Nintendo version and the Game Boy Advance version. You get into a battle, it's like, what? It hits you in the face. You're like, oh, okay, we're ready for battle. PlayStation version's of Fade. It's all fade, load time, boring. So yeah, Game Boy Advance, Wii Virtual Console version, or if you prefer, play it legit. The funny thing about the Final Fantasy games is they're so different throughout time that people are gonna say their favorite Final Fantasy is this, that, because of nostalgia, and that's really what it's there for. To nostalgically bring you back to that time that you dumped 100 hours into a game when you didn't have to, but you did because you loved it. And in that, a lot of people's first RPG was Final Fantasy VII. Mine was too. That was the first Final Fantasy that I played. Final Fantasy VII. That's my nostalgic Final Fantasy. I didn't play Final Fantasy VI until it came out for the Game Boy Advance. My brother played the shit out of it in the 90s, so I was like, oh yeah, that game that you were ball hogging the TV with, yeah, I don't want to play that. But I finally did, and Final Fantasy VII being my nostalgic game, I'm saying to me, Final Fantasy VI is actually better. Not knocking 7. 7 is fantastic. It's a great game. I'd love to review that after Red Dead Redemption. I did make that promise. There's something about 6. It's one of the greatest RPGs ever made to me. The one that rivals it to me is Chrono Trigger. Do I prefer Chrono Trigger or Final Fantasy VI? The answer is yes. Best I can do for you. I would love to see Final Fantasy VI be like an HBO series, 3 seasons long, live action, make it like Game of Thrones. I would die happy. In fact, if there's a producer out there who wants to start a Kickstarter, I will contribute to that. So like I said, one of the greatest RPGs ever for me. Most relatable characters, killer soundtrack, badass villain, great plot, great story, great battle system. I can't find any flaws in this game. The only flaw is that in the older versions, like Super Nintendo version, there's no run button. You walk until you get sprint shoes, but until then, walk. Final Fantasy VI is, without a doubt, of a caliber all its own, and it is awesometacular. Alright, in a world of subjective opinions for Final Fantasy games, I have not counted you out. Every opinion counts, every opinion matters. What is your favorite Final Fantasy game out there? Comment below, let me know. And as always, if you like what you've seen here and you want to see more, click right here to see more.